Recently on my channel, I commissioned a poll asking what you, the audience, would like to see come to the channel next in forms of a build. Now, a mod flavored mage build and surprise me were neck and neck at the end of this poll, so I figured I'd give you both of these in today's build, and this is the Tempest Invoker, which is a mod flavored build with a slight twist, which is really good no matter which difficulty you throw at it, and is phenomenal at pushing out awesome AoEs as well as pinpoint damage. Let's go. Quick side note, and I promise I won't keep you long, but recently I've seen an uptick of comments on build videos for Remnant 2, specifically saying things like, unless this build can beat a specific boss in Apocalypse difficulty, it's a trash build. And I've basically got two things that I just want to add on to this discussion before we even get into the detail of the build. Firstly, I don't believe that there's a one build to rule all builds in Remnant 2. One of the things that I like so much about this game is the fact that you can literally play the game however you want to. And also at the same time, while I know Apocalypse is this measuring stick for everybody in terms of build quality, the bottom line is, let's say more than half, possibly 70% of the player base will never even reach that difficulty, or for that matter, have no interest in actually playing in that difficulty. So I think the most important thing for you when you consider a build or you want to play the game is to play the build that you enjoy, play how you like, play at the difficulty that you like. Life's too hard already as it is. We don't need to make it harder with games. And secondly, I think any build in this game can play at any difficulty because this game, mechanics is king. So it doesn't matter how much damage your build deals, because even if you have a uber super powerful build, you can still be one shot by mechanics regardless of how strong your build is or how much damage it can push out. However, if you understand the mechanics of the game, the mechanics of bosses, you will be able to even beat those bosses with an extremely subpar build or a build that doesn't kill nearly as fast. Now, to illustrate this point, during this video you're going to see me fighting Venom, which is kind of like considered as one of the tougher bosses in the game, and definitely a boss that you want to kill as fast as possible since his mechanics are so difficult to deal with. However, you are able to push past that by understanding the boss, and therefore my urge to you is, if you want to play well in Apocalypse, don't necessarily search for the build that is the most broken and the easiest time to kill bosses, but rather take some time to learn the mechanics. Any case, enough about that shit, let's get on with the build. Alrighty, so getting us onto our archetypes, of course, because this is a mod based build, we're going to be putting Archon as our prime archetype. That's mainly due to the fact that Archon's prime perk is perfectly suited for this, since it automatically gives us a certain amount of mod power generation, but also every time we use a mod, we're going to get 100% mod power generation for 10 seconds. Now, the idea of these mod-based builds is that you find some broken mods and some weapons, and then you figure out a way to use them as often as possible, because that is where the power of the build comes from. So we want to be finding ways in which we can enrich our mod power generation and get those mods back up online as fast as possible so we can use them. Archon has a couple of other good things to call out here, namely the fact that you have Amplify, which gives us a huge amount of additional mod damage, as well as mod critical chance here. We also have Power Leak, which gives us mod power whenever we use a Relic, and that just couples really well with this whole generation aspect that we have here. Last but not least, in terms of the skills, you can mess around with things like Havoc Form and Chaos Gate, but I think Reality Rune is really good for us here for two reasons. First of all, Reality Rune gives us a huge amount of damage reduction, 25% as long as you stand within this bubble. But the other thing that I really enjoy about this is that this bubble actually slows down projectiles as well as enemies that pass through it. Oftentimes a boss that is super aggressive and in your face the entire time, you can use this rune to essentially gate them and block them and kite them through the AoE damage that we're going to be putting on the boss. So this definitely works very well and can oftentimes help you control the flow of the battle quite well. Now, in our secondary slot, of course, we're pairing this with Summoner for two reasons. Summoner is really good for mod and skill-based builds due to the Dominator perk that we have here, which increases the damage of mods and skills by 35% and gives us more crit as long as we have those summons out. And also just in general, this is a archetype that is very good defensively, and oftentimes with builds like this, these mage kind of builds, you need to find ways to just make yourself last a little bit longer in the fight, give yourself a little bit of defensibility there. So in the case of which summon you should be using, I think you can't go wrong with either the Reaver or the Flyer, depending on the situation, depending on the boss, depending on the exact biome that you're in. So in the case of big wide open areas, I think the flyers are fantastic. They're not that great in corridors, and in corridors, of course, the Reaver shines. Now in both cases, with the traits, we have Flash Caster on the Archon side, which increases our mod and skill casting speed by 50%, which means you can actually just prime those mods faster. And then on the Summoner side, of course, we have Regrowth, which gives us some innate health regeneration, 1.5 per second, which is good when we start stacking some additional stuff on there. Moving us over to our gear, and let me actually just move my face here quickly. Starting us off with the armor at the top here, we have the Leto Mark II helmet. In the chest, we have the Fey Royal body plate, Jesus. We have the Realm Walker pantaloons. Why do I choose armor that has these hard to pronounce words in them? And then we also have the Leto Mark II gloves. Now, I specifically choose this configuration to get to a particular weight, which is going to make a little bit more sense to you once we get to the traits, and how you can see how I try to get as close as possible to this 50 weight here. Now, being at 50 weight gives us a normal dodge at 25% stamina penalty. And if we actually look at the advanced stats here, we're going to be sitting at about 59% damage reduction. Now, this is, of course, actually boosted up by a couple of different things. And of course, we will look at that when we get to the traits and when we get to the rings and everything like that. But this is fairly decent. Of course, the maximum you can get is 80. So this gets us ever closer to that 80. And the bottom line is, I think when it comes to doing, Apocalypse level difficulty, once you get it to the point where you can survive one hit, now I'm not talking about one hit kill mechanics, but I'm talking about where you can survive just like one swipe or one hit. That's generally a good damage resistance area or damage reduction area to be at. And at that point in time, it's more important for you to just start learning how to actually avoid damage. Now, at the same time as well, we have some fairly decent resistances here at 10, 8, 5, 5, 7. And of course, our health is sitting at 130, which is pretty much, the 100 that you start with, and then the additional 30 that you get from trade. So we're not boosting this up in any other way. When it comes to the Relic, we're using the Shielded Heart here. Nothing much to say about this. This is one of the better ones in my opinion, because of the fact that it gives you a shield for 100% of your max health. In our case, our max health is 130. So we're getting a shield for another 130, giving us an effective HP pool of 260, or rather, let's say effective health of 260, which is pretty damn decent and makes you, take 1 or 2 or 3 hits before you go down. Now, when it comes to what we're slotting in here, again, I go for a little bit more on the defensive side here. So yes, I do give myself mythic mod damage here, which is 10% additional mod damage, but we are putting in 15% additional armor here with mythic armor effectiveness, as well as another 5% damage reduction with mythic damage reduction. If you are better at dodging in the game, if you're better at avoiding damage, then you can absolutely swap this out for more damage or more utility. But this is a fairly decent sort of compromise for me between being able to deal damage as well as being able to actually soak some of it. Then on to weapons and the meat and potatoes of this build. We're using the Sagittarius, more specifically the Starfall mod here, as this is kind of like the star of the build for me. I really do feel that I tend to make tons of builds that, capitalize on AoE over single target damage, but I find that Starfall is a nice combination between those two, since it does allow you to deny an area essentially as enemies move through this ring underneath Starfall. They take a huge amount of damage. But at the same time as well, if you're dealing with an enemy that likes to sit still in one place, you can pop this over him, and then at that point in time, you can just concentrate on avoiding, damage and taking damage yourself, while this just ticks away on this enemy and essentially deals a whole bucket load of damage to them. So it's pretty damn awesome. Now, at the same time, we're pairing this with Harmonizer because this just increases the damage of these hits of those stars coming out of the portal there. And it also allows us to generate 25% additional mod power for a stored weapon, or stowed weapon rather. Now, I'm using the Krell Axe over here. You can technically use any melee weapon on here. Generally speaking, I don't really think it matters. In the footage in the background, you'll see me every once in a while essentially use the charged attack of the Krell Axe to put a little bit of shock damage onto the enemy and overload them. But this is so negligible that it's actually not really that big a deal, and certainly doesn't factor into the damage profile of the build. So whichever melee weapon you want to throw in here, you can absolutely do that. Having something like Transference in here does actually allow you to generate ammo back into the build itself. And this is sometimes a good thing in builds like this that use a bow, since your ammo that you have in reserve for a bow is fairly little. And if you're actually using the bow actively and shooting it, you'll burn through that ammo quite fast. So giving yourself some additional ways to get ammo back is pretty cool. And that's kind of like the other reason why I'm running this here. rounding this out with the Nebula as our handgun in our secondary slot. And that's because I think Nano Swarm is probably, I mean, I don't really know if you can call it underrated, because I do see a lot of people using it, but I don't think people realize just how good Nano Swarm is. It's phenomenal at essentially cleaning out an area because of the auto seek nature of the Nano Swarm. So oftentimes if you're dealing with trash, if you're just moving from point A to point B on your way to a boss, you can simply just run and pop a Nano Swarm, and this Nano Swarm will just mop up around you and pretty much kill everything, since it deals a fair amount of acid damage and it actually lasts for 15 seconds, so it actually cleans up quite a bit. At the same time as well, in situations where you are fighting a boss, this is a fantastic way for you to just keep damage on the boss. Oftentimes this can be the difference between you know, life and death, because you're gaining life while, you know, these Nano Swarms are flying around, because we are using things like live steal and all of that in our traits. So this is giving us a way to also get additional life back by dealing damage, and that's always fantastic. Now Nano Swarm and the effect, the Starfall effect that we get from Sagittarius, really create like a nice little kill box if those two things combine on an enemy. And at that point in time, you'll often see, you know, the enemy really take a shitload of damage and it really start ticking on them. Now feedback is our mod of choice on here. Well, not our mod, but rather our mutator of choice on here, because this says that it using this weapon generates 20% of single charge value as a passive mod, mod power over 10 seconds, and then its level 10 says that mod damage generates 10% of the damage dealt as mod power. Now in this combination that we have here with feedback and with harmonizer and with what I'm going to show you with the rings and the amulet now, you can pretty much use these two skills on cooldown the entire time. As soon as your nanostorm is finished, the next one will be ready, even if that nanostorm only damaged one enemy during its entire 15 second duration. And that's how good our mod generation is on this build. And that's honestly, in my opinion, probably the most important thing when it comes to a build that capitalizes on dealing with damage with the mods, is you want to have access to those mods 100% of the time. For our amulet, we're using the golden ribbon, since this gives us mod damage of 25%, and every time we activate a mod, it gives us haste for 15 seconds. Haste is overall, I think, a very overlooked stat, but really does help you in situations where you want to be, you know, really mobile, as well as you want to be able to use, for instance, your relic very fast, since haste essentially hastens everything. So this makes you use, you know, consumables faster, it makes you activate mods fast and everything, and it's just really, really good all around for that. Now in our first ring slot, we're using Burden of the Destroyer. Now this does decrease the ideal range of all firearms by 25%, but it increases all of your damage by 15%. Now this offset here of 25% doesn't really matter all that much, because 99% of your damage is going to be coming from the mods. Yes, every once in a while you're going to shoot people with an arrow. Yes, every once in a while you're going to shoot them with the toxic, you know, flamethrower effect of Nebula. But in the end, you're mostly going to be activating Starfall, you're mostly going to be activating Nanoswarm, and that's not impacted by the downside of this ring at all. In our second ring, we're using Burden of the Follower. This is, you know, freaking amazing. I keep hearing that they're going to fix Ring of Malevolence, that it's busted and that it generates far too much mod, everything like that. And there's two reasons why I didn't use it in this build. First of all, for that, you know, that fact, I don't want it to be like a crutch that I lean on, and then when they do fix it, I'm like, oh shit, my build is fucking torched. But at the same time as well, I also just wanted to use something different, and I really think Burden of the Follower is slept on. I know that it's a slightly difficult ring to get hold of, but it is phenomenal because it increases your mod power generation by 50% while reducing your fire rate by 15%. Now, in builds where you are using long guns that have a high fire rate or that depend on dealing a lot of damage with a lot of bullets as fast as possible, this effect can be crippling because losing 15% fire rate is not that great. But in a build which uses a bow or a gas fucking flamethrower, fire rate doesn't matter shit, so it doesn't matter here, and this downside means nothing for the additional 50% mod power generation that you get. In our third slot, we're using the Cataloger's Jewel, and this says that it automatically generates 8 mod power per second. Now this, in conjunction with the passive effect that we're getting from the Archon archetype, as well as all of the rest of this, is how we constantly have our mods available for use. Now you can sort of chop and change and mix here, and maybe you can find a more perfect build that you can maybe optimize by swapping one piece of gear out or something like that. But this is really the no mess, no fuss setup that will always make sure that as soon as you want to use a mod, it's available to use. Last but not least, we're using the Soul Guard ring because this gives us a stack of Bulwark for each active summon. Now, mostly I run around with the 2 flyers out, so this gives us 2 stacks of Bulwark, which I think loosely translates to about 7.5 to 8% damage reduction, which is nothing to sneeze at, and that actually just tops us off very, very well and gets us quite close to, I think, about 63, 64, maybe 65%, considering things like diminishing returns and so on. Last but certainly not least, we need to cover the traits. And as provided by our archetypes, we have Flash, Caster, and Regrowth, which we've already discussed. Now, when you equip exactly the armor that I have in this build, you're going to end up with a weight of 56. So we're going to put 6 points into Strongback, which is going to drop us all the way from 56 to 50. And it's going to change us from a heavy encumbrance to a medium encumbrance, giving us that 25% cost penalty and normal dodge. If you don't do this, you're going to have to deal with that slower dodge and just in general that slower speed. Swiftness is something that I include in all of my builds. The 15% additional movement speed here just allows us to move around the battlefield a lot faster. A lot of the game is fighting bosses, but also a lot of the game is traversing from one side of the map to the other side of the map on the way to a boss. Being able to do that faster is super awesome and probably not something to be sneezed at. Vigor is important for us here because it gives us that 30 additional HP, which gets us from 100 to 130. But bear in mind, because of the relic that we use, that also gives us another 30 shield as well. So overall, this one thing here gives us 60 HP of effective health, which is phenomenal. We automatically have 1 point in endurance here, and we have 3 points into spirit. Now, as you can see here, of course, if I want to, or let's say for example I don't have some of those rings that I mentioned before when we were looking at them, then this is somewhere where you could potentially put some of your points into to get yourself higher to a mod percentage generation of like 20% or something like that. As you can see, I only have 6 on here because I'm getting so much from the rest of the gear. So that's basically allows me then a couple of additional trade points free, which is how I spend them here. Barkskin, another 10 points in there, is another 10% damage reduction, which is phenomenal. I put Bloodstream in here, which gives me gray health regeneration by 3. Now this, in conjunction with the health regeneration that we already get from the summoner side, means that overall we just regenerate HP, I would say, relatively fast, which allows us to essentially take 1 or 2 hits, but then just avoid damage for a little bit and get topped off without having to use a relic, without having to look for another source of healing, maybe even not dealing damage ourselves. Now we also get health by dealing damage because we have the Siphoner trait here, and of this I'm also got 10 points in, which gives us 3% lifesteal off of base damage. So that's just additional way for you to actually bolster yourself up after taking a little bit of damage. And that's the build right there. Have fun, experiment with it, change it however you want. Let me know which setups you're using. Let me know if you're using different mods. I truly like the mod playstyle in Remnant 2, even though it's not nearly as powerful as it was in Remnant 1. I definitely think if you want raw power, you know, just gun damage is the way to go in Remnant 2. And who knows, maybe that'll change when we have some DLC coming out down the line. Maybe there's some things that we still, some nice combos that we still haven't discovered yet. Of course, I'm gonna look out for it. Let me know in the comments if you find anything cool like that. Other than that, it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Till next video, fucking cheers.